My name is Clara Dawson. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty could weld any crack shut. I grew up inside a factory, literally. Dawson & Co. Fabrication in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania wasn't just a family business. It was the heartbeat of our household. The smell of metal dust clung to my hair the way other kids carried perfume. I could tell the difference between aluminum and steel by sound alone. People said I had a gift. My parents said I had the hands for it. But what they really meant, what I wouldn't understand until decades later, was that they saw me as the pair of hands, not the mind behind them. The moment I realized that truth, something inside me burned clean through, and nothing in my world was ever the same again. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoy real stories about family, grit, and redemption, hit subscribe to support this channel. It helps more than you can imagine and keeps these true-to-life dramas coming. I was born the second child of James and Margaret Dawson. My father started Dawson & Co. in the late 70s with a rusted drill press and the kind of stubbornness only steelworkers possess. My mother handled payroll from the kitchen table, counting invoices while I finished algebra homework. We weren't rich, but we were proud. The company's motto, stenciled in flaking black paint above the loading dock, read "Built by hands that care." By the time I was 16, I could weld, sort deliveries, and fix a forklift that even our mechanic gave up on. I wasn't the daughter who needed help. I was the daughter who gave it. My older brother Ethan, though, well, he was the opposite. While I was tightening bolts in winter wind that sliced through the bay doors, Ethan was perfecting his handshake at Chamber of Commerce mixers. He was polite, charming, clean-pressed, and completely allergic to dust. Still, I believed in balance. He could talk, I could build. Maybe that was how families worked. Yin and yang, right? Except it didn't feel balanced when the weight of the company rested squarely on my shoulders while Ethan got credit for holding the flashlight. Our business wasn't glamorous, but it carried history. Pittsburgh's skyline glowed with bridges, towers, and railings made by hands like ours. Each clang of hammer on steel felt like legacy echoing forward. I told myself I was lucky to be part of something bigger than me. Even when my palms bled through work gloves, I told myself that pain was proof I mattered. I can still remember the hum of the shop, the low drone of machines, the hiss of welding torches, the smell of hot metal and coffee burned in the break room pot. That sound was comfort once, like a song only I could hear. Until the day it wasn't. Until the day I realized every spark I threw off that floor was building a future that didn't include me. When you grow up inside a family business, lines blur. Family becomes an excuse for unpaid overtime. Tradition becomes a leash. My father used to say, "You don't clock out when it's your name on the wall." And I didn't. I stayed late. I skipped vacations. I patched up the machines, the schedules, even the moods. I held it all together because I believed effort equals belonging. But belonging, I learned, is a contract, one that can be rewritten without your consent. The first time I saw Ethan's new business cards, Ethan Dawson, Operations Liaison, I felt something cold crawl through me. I wasn't jealous. I was invisible. No one had told me he'd been promoted. No meeting, no notice. Just glossy cards sitting on my father's desk, waiting for signatures. When I asked about it that night over dinner, Dad smiled in that way men do when they think they're being reasonable. "Sweetheart, you'll keep the floor running. Ethan will take over operations. You've got the hands, he's got the vision." The room fell silent, except for the sound of my fork hitting the plate. Vision. As if years of sweat, precision, and knowledge were blindness. As if welding a perfect seam required no vision at all. I remember the exact second something snapped in me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was a quiet detachment, like a gear slipping loose. I looked at the man who taught me everything and realized he didn't see me anymore. Not as a partner, not even as a daughter who'd earned her place. He saw a tool that had done its job. That's the moment the story really begins. It's easy to stay loyal when people value you. It's hard when they praise you only for what you can produce. But here's the truth. No one tells you about working for family. The people who raised you can take you for granted in ways a stranger never could. You keep thinking, if I just work harder, they'll notice. But effort doesn't rewrite perception. It just feeds it. So I worked, And they watched, and every time I fixed a broken part or saved a delayed shipment, I thought I was proving myself. They thought I was doing my duty. You might wonder why I stayed so long. The answer is simple: hope. Hope that love and labor were interchangeable. Hope that if I kept building their dream, eventually they'd build space for mine. I was wrong. The irony of this story is that I didn't leave because of failure. I left because of success, because I finally realized I was propping up a legacy that would never carry my name. The realization came quietly, like dawn sneaking under a door, lighting up everything I'd been too tired to see. That's when I started thinking about freedom. Not in a dramatic, pack your bags kind of way, but in the small rebellions. Lingering 5 extra minutes at lunch, daydreaming about what I could build if I weren't chained to their version of success. I began sketching ideas on scrap paper. My own shop, my own clients, my own rules. I didn't know then that those sketches would become blueprints for a new life. People always ask, what was the moment you decided to walk away? They expect a fight, a slammed door, maybe betrayal. But sometimes the loudest endings come in silence. One evening, as the shop lights flickered and the air filled with the metallic scent of burnt flux, I looked around at the rows of machines, each one humming, loyal, consistent, and thought, even the metal gets treated better than I do. That thought scared me more than it should have, because it was true. And that's when I knew something had to change. Before I tell you what happened next, how I walked out, how I rebuilt everything from a barn outside Columbus, and how the very people who dismissed me would one day come begging for my help, I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, if your own family told you that you were just labor, that your worth ended at your wrists, would you, A, stay, hoping they'd finally see your value? Leave, even if it meant starting over from nothing? Comment your answer below, A or B. I read every single one. The morning my parents called the meeting, the air in the shop felt different, like the air before a storm. I remember the way the fluorescent lights hummed, the smell of burnt metal hanging thick over everything. I thought maybe we'd landed a new contract, or Dad was finally talking about upgrading the ventilation system I'd been begging for. I didn't expect what came next. Dad was sitting behind his desk, my mother perched next to him with her usual tight smile, and Ethan, my brother, already in the good chair. I stood across from them, wiping grease off my hands with a rag that never seemed to get clean. "Clara," Dad said, with that heavy sigh he always used when he thought he was being fatherly. "We've been thinking about the future of Dawson & Co. It's time to make things official." I nodded, waiting. He gestured toward Ethan. "Your brother will be taking over as director of operations." At first, I didn't understand. "Operations of what?" I asked. "The company," he said simply. My mind blinked like those overhead lights that never stop flickering. "You mean he'll handle the office side?" Dad shook his head. "No, the whole thing." Mom reached for her mug of tea. "You'll keep the floor running, honey. You're amazing with your hands. You always have been." She smiled, proud of herself for what she thought was a compliment. And then came the phrase that would tattoo itself into the back of my mind for years. "You're just labor, Clara," Dad said. "That's your strength. Ethan's got the big picture. You've got the work ethic. Together, you'll keep this company alive." Just labor. It wasn't said with cruelty. That's the part that stung the most. It was said casually, like it was an objective truth, like gravity or rust. The room was silent except for the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked at Ethan. He smiled, small, smug, and oblivious. "Hey, don't look at me like that," he said, half laughing. "You'll still be my right hand." Right hand. He actually said that. Dad went on about next-generation leadership and expanding into new markets, and I just stood there, holding that dirty rag, feeling like I'd somehow stepped outside my own body. For a moment, I saw myself from above, the girl who'd never missed a shift, who'd patched up every broken machine, who'd trained half the crew, standing in front of her family being told she was a pair of hands, nothing more. I wanted to shout, to list every time I'd saved them from disaster. The night the main compressor blew, and I welded it back together with a flashlight clamped between my teeth. The time Ethan forgot to order replacement bearings, and I drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to pick them up myself. The weekends, the skipped birthdays, the burns I still carried on my forearms. I wanted to scream, You're sitting in air conditioning because I've been out there sweating. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I swallowed hard and nodded, because that's what daughters do when they're trying not to make things worse. After the meeting, I stayed in the break room pretending to organize invoices. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the stapler. Cheryl, our accountant, poked her head in. "Everything okay, Clara?" she asked. "Yeah," I said automatically. "Just tired." She nodded knowingly. "You always are." Ethan came in later, slapping his new title card on the table. "Check it out," he said. "Fancy, huh?" "Sure," I said. "You'll see, this is good for us," he continued. "I'll handle strategy. You focus on execution. It's like Dad said, brains and brawn. Dream team." I forced a smile. "Right, dream team." He left whistling. I sat there long after the shop had gone quiet, the only sound the tick of the wall clock and the faint rattle of the ventilation. I stared at my calloused hands, the scars, the black smudges that never seemed to wash off no matter how much soap I used. Just labor. That night, at home, I couldn't eat. The phrase kept circling my head like a mosquito you can't kill. My mother tried to act normal, passing me the potatoes. "Ethan's nervous, she said. "He needs your support. You've always been good at keeping people grounded." "Sure," I said softly. "I'll keep him grounded." Later, I walked outside and sat on the porch steps. The air smelled like rain and iron. Across the street, the old mill's lights were still on, workers finishing their shift. I watched the sparks fly in the distance, bright and beautiful and temporary. I thought about how every one of those sparks burns out in seconds, and how I'd spent decades burning for a family that never looked up long enough to notice. The next morning, I showed up early, same as always. I couldn't help it. Habit runs deeper than resentment. Ethan arrived an hour later in a crisp white shirt, no sign of grease or effort. He gathered everyone in the shop for a pep talk about innovation and next-level productivity. The guys looked at him, polite but unimpressed. They knew who kept this place running. "Clara here," he said, putting an arm around me, "will keep the gears turning. You all listen to her. She's basically the backbone." I smiled for the crowd, but inside, that word backbone twisted like a knife, because a backbone supports everything but never gets to see where it's going. When the meeting ended, Jeff, one of the welders, pulled me aside. "You good?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine." I lied. He nodded but didn't believe me. "You're the reason this place hasn't collapsed." His words were kind, but they didn't fix anything. Compliments from coworkers don't replace respect from family. Over the next few days, I tried to move forward. I told myself titles didn't matter, that work speaks louder than politics. But then Ethan started changing things. Rearranging schedules without telling anyone, canceling overtime for the guys who needed it most, ordering supplies based on spreadsheets instead of actual demand. When I tried to warn him, he brushed me off. "Relax, Clara. You get too emotional about this stuff." Too emotional. That phrase joined just labor in the growing list of things I'd never forget. By the end of that week, I caught myself staring at the shop walls differently. For the first time, I saw them not as my home, but as a cage. I'd spent my life patching and fixing, always making things work. Maybe that's why I stayed so long, because I thought my job was to repair what's broken. But how do you fix something when the crack runs right through your own family? One evening, I lingered after closing. The machines were quiet, the floor spotless, and the smell of steel hung heavy in the air. I ran my hand along the edge of a finished railing, cool and smooth, and thought about all the years I'd spent shaping metal into something strong, dependable, worth keeping. I realized I'd never asked the same of the people around me. That night, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer mistake endurance for loyalty. If being part of this legacy meant shrinking into a role they could label labor, then maybe it was time to stop being their backbone and start being my own. It would take me a while to act on that promise. Old habits don't die easily, but that was the moment, the true turning point, when the foundation began to crack. I just didn't know yet that when a crack forms, it's not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's where the light finally gets in. There's a point in every story where something inside you simply gives way, not in an explosion, not in some cinematic outburst, but in the quiet collapse between one breath and the next. For me, that moment came on a Thursday night in early spring, when the shop clocks glowed 11:47 p.m., and the air tasted like metal and regret. I'd been welding for 14 hours straight, my gloves stiff with sweat, my stomach growling on nothing but stale coffee and a granola bar. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, except me, because no matter how much Ethan messed up, someone still had to make sure the orders went out. Someone still had to hold the seams together. That week had been chaos. Ethan had streamlined operations by cutting our supply budget, ignoring the fact that welding rods and steel sheets don't multiply by faith. He'd messed up a shipment for one of our oldest clients, and instead of admitting the mistake, he blamed the supplier. I spent 2 days cleaning up the mess, calling vendors, apologizing for things I didn't do. When I brought it up to my parents, my mother sighed like I was the one causing problems. "Clara," she said, "you can't get upset every time Ethan stumbles. He's learning. Learning. At 40. Dad didn't even look up from his paperwork. "You need to manage your emotions," he muttered. "We need harmony right now." Harmony. The word felt like a choke chain. That Thursday, I was the last one on the floor again, trying to fix a bent railing Ethan had promised to deliver by morning. I could have gone home. I could have let the order fail, let his leadership speak for itself. But old habits die hard. Somewhere deep down, the daughter part of me still wanted to make them proud. When I finally finished the weld, I sat on the edge of the workbench and checked my phone. A new email blinked on the screen. Subject line, rebranding feedback. It was from Ethan. "Clara, can you take another pass at the logo? The font feels dated. Also, we need to update our social media. You've been replying too informally. Keep it professional. Watch your tone. Watch your tone." That phrase hit harder than I cared to admit. I'd spent years holding that place together with my bare hands, and now my tone was the problem? I stared at the message until the letters blurred, until the hum of the machine started to sound like laughter. And then I laughed too, a hollow, tired laugh that echoed off the steel walls. I grabbed a napkin from the break room, pulled out a pen, and wrote 2 words in thick black ink. "I'm done." I folded it, slid it into my locker, and locked the door. Not for them, to remind myself that I wasn't bluffing this time. When I got home that night, I didn't shower or eat. I just sat in the dark living room, boots still on, and listened to the refrigerator hum. It was the same sound as the shop's lights, that low electric whine of something running long past when it should have been turned off. The next morning, I didn't go in. I didn't call, didn't text. Just stayed in bed, watching the sunlight creep across the ceiling. At first, it felt wrong, like skipping a step on a ladder. My body itched to move, to grab a wrench, check the orders, do something. But after a few hours, the stillness began to settle. Day 2, I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, hot coffee that didn't taste like tin. I sat at my own kitchen table for the first time in months and realized I'd never actually used the good plates I bought 3 years ago. I took a walk around my block, noticed the magnolia trees blooming pink against the gray sky. I hadn't looked up in so long, I'd forgotten how big the world felt. By day 3, I felt the guilt start to fade. No phone calls from Dad, no texts from Mom, nothing. They didn't even notice I was gone. That silence was worse than anger. It was confirmation. To them, I wasn't missing. I was replaceable. That night, my friend Maya called. She'd left Dawson & Co. months earlier after getting tired of Ethan's micromanagement. "You finally do it?" she asked when I picked up. "Do what?" "Quit," she said. "I saw it coming. I'm just surprised it took you this long." I laughed softly. "I didn't quit. I just didn't show up." "Same thing," she said. "How's it feel?" "Strange," I admitted. "Quiet." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Clara, you've been keeping that place alive for years. You leaving isn't quitting. It's cutting loose a sinking ship." Maybe she was right, but when I hung up, I cried anyway. Not because I missed the job, but because I finally admitted to myself that love doesn't fix everything. Not even love for family. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, half laughing, half panicked. "Hey, you still mad? We've got a shipment due Friday, so just checking if you're coming in." I played it twice, then deleted it. I didn't owe him a response. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how they were managing without me. So I called Jeff, one of the welders I'd trained. He answered on the first ring. "You're lucky you got out," he said. "The place is falling apart. Ethan tried to process payroll through Excel. He crashed the whole system." I felt a pang, Not guilt, not pity, but something like relief wrapped in justice. That weekend, I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't make a post online or write some grand goodbye letter. I just existed. I cleaned my apartment, fixed a leaky faucet, read a book I'd bought 2 years ago and never opened. Every little thing felt like breathing again after years underwater. By Monday, word had spread. 3 former clients called, asking if I was doing independent work. One even said, "If you ever go solo, we'd rather work with you directly." I laughed when I hung up. Not out of arrogance, out of disbelief. I'd been told my worth ended at my wrists, that my value was in my hands, not my head. But here were people seeing me for what I actually was. Capable, dependable, irreplaceable. That night, I found myself standing in front of my old work boots by the door. The laces were frayed, the soles scuffed to hell, but I couldn't throw them out. They'd carried me through too many storms. I picked them up, brushed the dust away, and whispered, "We're done with that place." When you've spent years defining yourself by your usefulness, stepping away feels like stepping off a cliff. But I didn't fall. I floated. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen. I made another cup of coffee and didn't check my phone once. For the first time in my adult life, there was no schedule, no orders, no noise, just me and the faint echo of possibility. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I didn't have a plan or a business name or even a blueprint, but I had something I hadn't felt in years: space. Space to imagine, to rebuild, to exist without apology. That napkin I'd left in my locker? It probably got thrown out the next day, crumpled up and forgotten. But for me, those 2 words were sacred. I'm done. They weren't just a resignation, they were a declaration. I wasn't done with work. I wasn't done with creating. I was done being invisible. And even though I couldn't see it yet, those quiet days, the breakfast, the sunlight, the stillness, were the first sparks of something new. The start of a life built not from obligation, but from choice. A life where my hands would still build things, but this time, they'd be building something that was finally mine. The first days after I walked away from Dawson & Co. felt like standing on a cliff with my eyes closed. The air was thin and unfamiliar, the kind of quiet that comes only after years of noise. I didn't have a plan, just exhaustion and a stack of unpaid bills. But somewhere under the fatigue was a strange new current. Possibility. It hummed quietly, like a machine waiting for the switch to flip. On the 4th day, I woke before dawn out of habit. My hands twitched for work even when my head said rest. I brewed coffee, the real kind, not the sludge from the vending machine, and watched sunlight spill through the window onto my scarred knuckles. For years, those hands had built someone else's dream. Now they were unemployed, but for the first time they were free. The phone rang that morning. The number was familiar. Ruth, procurement lead for the Cleveland Transit Authority, one of our most loyal clients. "Clara," she said without preamble, "I don't know what's going on over there, but your brother sent the wrong gauge steel again. Twice in 1 month. You still working with them?" "Not anymore," I said. "Good," she replied, "because I've got a job that needs someone who actually knows what they're doing." "Interested?" Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in a while: respect. Not pity, not obligation. Respect. I hesitated. "I don't even have a workspace right now." "You've got the skills," she said. "Find the rest." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, heart pounding. The idea of taking independent work was terrifying, but staying idle felt worse. I needed tools, a place, someone I could trust. There was only one person who came to mind: Maya. She'd been our logistics lead for years before leaving Dawson & Co. after one too many arguments with Ethan. If I was the muscle, she was the brain that kept deliveries on time and customers calm. I called her that afternoon. "Maya, I might be crazy," I said when she picked up. "Probably," she replied, laughing. "What are we building?" By sunset, I was driving 3 hours south to Columbus, where Maya lived with her husband on a small property outside the city. She met me in the driveway, wearing paint-splattered overalls and holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Remember my granddad's old barn?" she said, pointing toward a weathered red structure behind the house. "I've been meaning to tear it down, unless you think we can turn it into something better." We walked through the barn, light cutting through the slats, dust dancing in the beams. The floor was cracked concrete, the air thick with old hay and rust. But I saw it, the bones of a workshop, space for welding tables, tool racks, a ventilation hood, a place where sparks could fly without apology. That night, we sat on the barn steps and drew plans on a napkin. Maya handled logistics and permits. I'd rebuild the physical space. We named it after an idea rather than a person. Iron Bloom Fabrication. It felt right. Flowers from iron. Growth from grit. The next morning, we started. We spent days clearing out old farm tools, sweeping dust, scrubbing the walls. We laid new concrete over the cracked floor, one section at a time, until it gleamed smooth under the shop lights. I rebuilt the wiring myself, one circuit after another, until the hum of new power filled the space. When the first machine flickered to life, I swear it sounded like a heartbeat. We didn't have much, just a secondhand MIG welder, a few grinders, and a workbench rescued from the scrapyard. But it was ours. No family politics, no hierarchy, no one telling me to watch my tone. We established rituals to remind ourselves why we were doing this. Every Friday morning was First Spark Friday. Coffee at dawn, then the first arc of the day lit in silence, a promise to build something worth keeping. Sundays were Clean Sweep Sundays, when we'd blast old soul records and scrub the shop until it shone. Maya called it therapy. I called it freedom. Word spread fast. Ruth's transit job turned into 3. A small architectural firm asked if we could handle custom brackets. A farmer down the road brought in a broken gate. Nothing glamorous, but it was work that mattered. Every piece we fixed or forged came with gratitude, not entitlement. One afternoon, 2 teenage girls from the local trade school, Jules and Marisol, stopped by. They'd heard about us through their welding instructor, a friend of Maya's. "We want to learn from women who actually do it," Jules said. I looked at their hopeful faces, the sparks of curiosity already in their eyes, and said, "Grab a pair of gloves." They became our first apprentices. I showed them how to measure twice, weld once, how to listen for the sound of good fusion, that low, steady hiss that means you've done it right. They worked hard and asked questions no one had ever dared to ask me at Dawson & Co. It reminded me of myself at their age, hungry, capable, but underestimated. As Iron Bloom began to take shape, so did I. Each day peeled away a layer of resentment I didn't know I'd been carrying. I learned to laugh again, to trust silence without fearing what it meant. Maya and I would eat lunch on the loading ramp, legs dangling, watching trains pass in the distance. We'd talk about everything and nothing, how people think labor is just strength, when really it's precision, patience, art. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maya turned to me and said, "You realize you're smiling again, right?" I hadn't noticed. Maybe that's what rebuilding really is. Not starting from nothing, but finally building something true. As the weeks passed, the shop grew louder. The sound of grinders, welders, laughter, and music filled the air. It didn't feel like work. It felt like belonging. For years, I'd been told my value was in what I produced. But now I was learning that my worth was in what I created. And creation, real creation, starts with freedom. One night, after finishing a big order, I sat alone in the shop. The machines had gone quiet, the floor swept clean. I looked around at the tools, the fresh paint on the walls, the name Iron Bloom Fabrication stenciled across the front door, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades: peace. I realized I wasn't running from Dawson & Co. anymore. I was running toward something. This little barn, these people, this work, it wasn't a rebellion. It was a resurrection. There's a specific kind of pride that comes from building with your own 2 hands, not just metal, but meaning. Every weld, every bolt, every spark was proof that I was still here, still capable, still worthy. When I locked up that night, the sky was heavy with stars. My reflection stared back at me from the shop window, tired, strong, whole. I thought of the napkin I'd left in my locker, the words "I'm done" scribbled in haste, and for the first time I understood what they truly meant. I wasn't done at all. I was just beginning. The first few months of Iron Bloom felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind at my back. Terrifying, unpredictable, but alive. Every day, Maya and I woke before sunrise to unlock the barn doors and breathe in the metallic tang of possibility. The space still smelled faintly of hay and old wood, but it was our cathedral now. We didn't need marble floors or glass walls. We had sparks, sweat, and the kind of faith you only find when there's no safety net left. At first, the work was small, fixing railings, fabricating small brackets, repairing farm gates. The kind of jobs nobody else bothered with, but every one of them mattered. Word started to spread, not through ads or websites, but through the quiet whisper network of people who still believed a handshake was better than a promise. Call Iron Bloom, they'd say. Those women will get it done. We took every call, no matter how humble. A contractor needed custom supports for a historic renovation downtown. A sculptor wanted someone to cut delicate steel petals for an art installation. Each project was a test, a chance to prove that we weren't just a small operation in a refurbished barn. We were professionals who knew our craft. Maya handled the logistics like a conductor leading an orchestra. She managed suppliers, routed deliveries, and built a scheduling system that could keep NASA organized. I stayed on the floor, my gloves stained with soot and triumph, coaxing life out of cold metal. By the time we wrapped our first dozen jobs, our name had started traveling further than we could. One afternoon, the phone rang and Maya's expression changed. "Clara," she mouthed, covering the receiver. "It's the Cleveland Transit Authority." I wiped my hands and took the call. Ruth's voice came through the static, steady as ever. "I've got a rush order," she said. "A major refit for a fleet of buses. Tight tolerance, ridiculous turnaround. Think you can handle it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, though we both knew it was a gamble. After hanging up, I looked at Maya. "We'll need help." "We'll figure it out," she said. "We always do." That weekend, we brought in Jules and Marisol full-time, paid them properly, and worked side by side until the early hours. The shop buzzed like a living thing, grinders whining, torches flaring, music humming from the radio we'd wired to the wall. The air was thick with heat and purpose. There's a rhythm to hard work that feels like prayer. You lose yourself in the repetition, the hiss of welding, the clang of steel, the crackle of your own heartbeat keeping time. Somewhere between exhaustion and focus, I found peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on approval, but the kind that comes from knowing you're finally doing what you were meant to do. We delivered the order ahead of schedule. When Ruth came to inspect, she ran her hand along the finished railings and nodded. "Smooth," she said. "Like factory precision, but better. You put care into this." That single sentence was worth more than any paycheck. A week later, she called again, this time with a larger contract. Then another. Within months, Iron Bloom had gone from a side project in a barn to a name people recognized across 3 counties. We had repeat clients, a full schedule, and the kind of momentum that made you afraid to blink. It wasn't just business growth. It was emotional recovery. Each new project repaired a small part of me that had cracked back at Dawson Coco. Every signature on a new invoice felt like reclaiming something I'd been told I didn't deserve. But success brought ghosts too. Sometimes, after locking up at night, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, expecting an angry email from Ethan or some urgent request from my father. Old instincts die slowly. For years, my worth had been tied to their approval. Now I was learning how to live without needing it. Maya saw it before I did. "You still flinch when the phone rings," she said one night. "I guess I'm waiting for permission I don't need anymore," I admitted. She smiled. "You don't need permission to build something good, Clara. You just need courage to keep going." Her words stayed with me. That winter, we expanded the shop. We bought a larger compressor, added a second welding station, and painted the interior walls with bright white enamel that reflected the light like snow. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like progress. On Fridays, we'd celebrate with pizza and black coffee, our version of champagne and cigars. Jules and Marisol would stay late just to practice, their laughter echoing through the rafters. We also started something new, community workshops for women who wanted to learn basic fabrication. I watched as grandmothers, teachers, nurses, and mothers picked up welding torches for the first time, their eyes lighting up when sparks flew. "I didn't know I could do this," one woman said, awe in her voice. "You always could," I told her. "You just needed someone to hand you the torch." Those nights reminded me why I'd started Iron Bloom. It wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself and to other women that skill isn't defined by gender or title. That hands, no matter whose they are, can create beauty and strength in the same stroke. By spring, our reputation reached beyond Ohio. A regional supplier offered us a partnership. A local paper ran a feature calling us the women who welded their way to success. It was flattering, but also strange. For years, I'd been invisible in my own family's company. Now strangers were celebrating me for the same work that had once been dismissed as just labor. Still, I kept my feet on the ground. Because success, like welding, requires control. You push too fast, you blow through the seam. I didn't want fame. I wanted foundation. Then one morning, a familiar name popped up on my phone. Jeff, the welder from Dawson & Co. "Guess who's running around the shop pretending to be you?" he said. I laughed. "Ethan?" "Bingo. He's drowning, Clara. Half the floor quit. Clients are furious. He's blaming everyone but himself." For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. That night, as I drove home from the shop, I passed the Cleveland Transit Depot, where our newest batch of railings had just been installed. The metal gleamed under the streetlights, strong, clean, perfect. I pulled over and watched as workers tested the fit, nodding in approval. Nobody there knew me. They didn't know how much those pieces meant, how many years of silence and dismissal they symbolized. But I knew, and that was enough. When I got back to the shop, Maya was still inside, finishing paperwork. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Maybe I have," I answered. "The ghost of who I used to be." She smiled. "Then bury her deep, Clara. You've got work to do." Work, the word no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like a song. We stayed late that night, sketching ideas for expansion. A second building, more apprentices, new machines. The possibilities stretched ahead like open road. I went home exhausted, my clothes smelling of smoke and steel, my heart steady and full. Before bed, I opened my old leather notebook, the one I used to carry at Dawson & Co., and flipped to a blank page. At the top I wrote, "Iron Bloom doesn't chase approval, it earns respect." Then in smaller letters below, "We're not small anymore." For the first time in years, I believed it. It was late on a Wednesday when the past finally called me. I remember the way the phone buzzed on the workbench, vibrating against the steel like a trapped fly. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of calibrating a new cutting head, my gloves still warm from the torch, my head full of plans. But when I saw the caller ID, Dad, I froze. The name looked strange now, small and unfamiliar on the screen, like a word I hadn't used in years. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Clara?" His voice came, low and uneven. "We're in a tight spot." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try to pretend this was a social call. The same man who once told me I was just labor was now speaking like a man running out of options. I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. He sighed. "Cleveland Transit said they'll reconsider the partnership if you handle the next batch personally." The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed. The same client they lost because of Ethan's mistakes, the one Iron Bloom had saved months ago, was now holding the power. My power. "I see," I said carefully. He hesitated. "Look, I know things have been complicated, but we need to focus on solutions." That word again, we. For years, it had meant me doing the work and them taking the credit. "I'll think about it," I said. "But if I do it, it'll be on my terms." Well, Iron Bloom acts as a third-party contractor. My materials, my schedule, my rates, non-negotiable. There was a long pause, then a quiet, reluctant exhale. "Fine," he said. "I'll have Cheryl send over the paperwork." When the line went dead, I stood there for a moment, staring at the sparks still cooling on the floor. I didn't feel vindicated or angry. Just done, like the final piece of a machine finally clicking into place after years of misalignment. Cheryl's email came an hour later. "Understood. Processing now." Efficient, professional, no sentiment, just business. Maybe that was the only way it could be. When I told Maya, she smirked. Guess the mighty Dawson & Co. finally realized who was holding the wrench all along. "Maybe," I said, trying not to let the bitterness show. Or maybe they just ran out of hands. 2 days later, I drove back to the old shop for the first time since leaving. It felt like walking through a memory you'd already made peace with. The building looked smaller somehow, the parking lot emptier. I could almost see the ghost of my younger self carrying coffee cups and spare parts through those same doors, desperate to prove something to people who'd already decided what I was. Inside, the air was heavy, the hum of machines muted. Ethan stood in the middle of the floor, wearing a crisp shirt that didn't belong in a workshop, a phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, his grin flickered like a dying light. "Well, look who it is," he said. "Boss lady herself." I nodded. Here to get the specs for the Cleveland job. He laughed, like we were sharing a joke. You know, I've been thinking we could use your touch back here. Things have been hectic. Hectic? I repeated. That's one word for it. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, pretending to be casual. Maybe we could work something out. You handle operations, I handle clients. Just like old times. Old times? I said quietly. You mean when I worked and you posed for photos? His smile faltered. No need to get defensive. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not a rival, not even an antagonist, just a man drowning in a sea he'd insisted was his to command. You're not my boss anymore, Ethan, I said, and I'm not here to save you. When I turned to leave, I caught Dad watching from the office window. His expression was unreadable, part pride, part defeat, part something in between. For a moment, I thought he might come down and say something. He didn't. He just turned away. That evening, as I was closing up at Iron Bloom, a familiar car pulled into the gravel lot. My mother stepped out, holding a foil-covered tray in both hands. Lasagna, the family peace offering. Oh, Clara, she said softly, stepping around a coil of cable. You always loved working with your hands. I didn't even look up from the invoices I was signing. Is that a bribe or an apology? Her smile was tight, her voice trembling at the edges. Can it be both? I just miss my children getting along. I set down my pen. We were never getting along, Mom. I was just the one staying quiet. She looked around the shop, the neatly stacked steel, the glowing work lights, the laughter from Maya in the back office. You built all this? She asked, almost whispering. With what was left, I said. You handed me the scraps. I just learned how to weld them into something better. Her eyes glistened. Your father didn't mean it, you know, the whole just labor thing. Sure, he did, I said, and finally met her gaze. And he was right. I was labor. But not anymore. She didn't say much after that. Just stood there for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're stronger than we ever knew, she said quietly. I always was, I replied. When she left, she took the lasagna with her. I watched the taillights disappear down the dirt road and felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Love doesn't vanish when trust does. It just changes shape. 3 days later, I got another call, this time from an unknown number. Hi, Clara, a man's voice said. This is Frank. I got your contact from Ruth at Cleveland Transit. You doing independent work now? I smiled. Yes. What do you need? He explained that Dawson & Co. had shipped the wrong materials again, second time in a month. They're blaming the supplier, but the supplier swears your brother sent the wrong specs. Of course he did. Frank hesitated. The client's furious, but they said they'd be open to working with you directly if you've got the bandwidth. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The same clients who'd once known me only as Ethan's sister were now calling me first. I've got the bandwidth, I said finally. That night, I sat in the quiet workshop long after everyone went home. The air smelled like ozone and sawdust, and the only light came from the street lamp outside. I thought about my father's voice on the phone, my mother's apology disguised as dinner, my brother's forced grin, all the years I spent trying to earn their respect, and how effortlessly I'd found it once I stopped asking for it. When Maya came in the next morning, she found me sketching designs for new equipment. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep, I answered. We've got work to do. She smiled, knowing better than to ask why. As the day unfolded, orders poured in, some from Cleveland, others from clients I didn't even know existed. It felt like the universe had been waiting for me to walk away before it started opening doors. Later that afternoon, I got an email from my father's accountant confirming the contract we'd agreed on. Iron Bloom as an independent contractor handling Dawson & Co.'s Cleveland Transit order. Underneath the signature block, I noticed something small but poetic. The invoice line that read, Client Dawson & Co., Fabrication followed by Subcontractor, Iron Bloom Fabrication LLC. I smiled. I hadn't just stepped out of their shadow. I'd stepped above it. And as I watched Maya and the girls fire up the machines, laughter echoing through the barn, I realized something simple and profound. I hadn't lost my family. I just redefined what that word meant. It started with an email that should have been harmless. A subject line that read, Duplicate vendor, just checking. I almost skipped it, assuming it was spam or some clerical mix-up. But when I opened the attachment, my stomach dropped. It was a proposal, mine. Every word, every line, every format detail. Even the typo in the second paragraph I'd meant to fix weeks ago. Only the logo was different. The bold header that had once read Iron Bloom Fabrication LLC now said Steel Line, a division of Dawson & Co. Fabrication. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I laughed. A hollow, unbelieving sound that came more from fatigue than humor. After all these years, after everything, I shouldn't have been surprised. Ethan had always been good at pretending. Pretending to lead, pretending to innovate, pretending to understand things built with sweat instead of words. But this was new, even for him. I forwarded the email to Maya. She called within seconds. "You're kidding," she said. "I wish I was." They copied the whole proposal? Down to the formatting? Even the font, I said. And the footer still has our client portal link. She went silent for a moment, then laughed. "You can't make this up. What do you want to do?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the beams of the shop ceiling. Not what they expect. Instead of confronting them, I documented everything. Screenshots, metadata, emails. Years of working in a family business had taught me that truth didn't matter unless you could prove it twice. That weekend, I met with Ruth from Cleveland Transit and Frank from the Supplier Network. Over black coffee in a diner booth, I showed them the proposal and the copy. Both of them looked at each other and then at me, shaking their heads. "Same specs," Ruth said. "Same structure, same pricing matrix. Same everything," Frank muttered. "Even your phrasing. Precision meets purpose." I nodded. "They didn't even bother to rewrite my tagline." Frank whistled. "They've hit bottom, Clara. This is desperation." He was right, but I didn't feel angry. I felt something deeper, clarity. The kind that comes when someone finally shows you who they are and you stop pretending they might change. A few days later, I got a message from the statewide Manufacturing and Supplier Expo in Columbus, the same event Dawson & Co. used to attend every year. They were looking for case studies for their ethics and innovation panel. I knew what I needed to do. I called Ruth. "You still know the event coordinator?" "Of course," she said slowly. "Why?" "I think I've got a story they'd be interested in." When the day of the expo arrived, the convention hall buzzed with the sound of ambition, keynotes, sales pitches, the hum of machinery displays. Iron Bloom didn't have a booth that year. We didn't need one. We had a message instead. During the panel, the moderator introduced the topic: integrity in contracting, innovation versus imitation. When the consultant began sharing examples of ethical violations, a slide flickered onto the massive screen. 2 proposals appeared side by side. On the left, Iron Bloom Fabrication, original document. On the right, Steel Line, Dawson & Co.'s so-called new division. The consultant zoomed in on the metadata. The digital fingerprint showing that the Steel Line file had been copied from Iron Bloom's template, not created from scratch. A murmur rolled through the room. People leaned forward in their seats. The consultant didn't name names at first, but the logo was clear enough for everyone to see. Then came the question that sealed it. "What should a company do?" someone in the audience asked, "if their former employee becomes a competitor?" The consultant smiled sadly. They should have paid her what she was worth before she left. Applause rippled through the room. I felt my throat tighten, not from pride, but from something like release. Years of silence, years of being dismissed, erased in a single sentence spoken into a microphone. As the session ended, people crowded around asking about Iron Bloom, about our apprenticeships, about how to collaborate. I gave polite answers, shaking hands, smiling. But then, through the shifting crowd, I saw her, my mother. She stood near the back of the room, her hands clasped tightly over her purse, eyes fixed on me. For a second, I thought I'd imagined her, but then she started walking toward me, slow and deliberate. "Clara," she said softly when she reached me, "I didn't know you'd be here." "Neither did I said. "You humiliated your brother." Her voice trembled. "In front of everyone." I held her gaze. "No, Mom, he did that all by himself. I just stopped covering for him." Her eyes glistened. Anger and sorrow tangled together. "Your father's not well. The stress, the lawsuits, the money, he's barely sleeping." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry he's sick," I said quietly. "I hope he gets better." "That's it?" she asked, voice cracking. "After everything?" I thought about the nights I'd spent at that shop, the burns on my arms, the meetings where my opinions were ignored, the way my mother once told me to stop being so emotional. I thought about how silence had cost me years of peace. That's more than anyone said to me when I left, I said. No one called. No one checked in. No one cared. Her lips trembled. I made lasagna, she whispered. I built a company, I replied gently. I think we're even. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but instead she just nodded, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. I watched her go until she was swallowed by the noise of the convention floor. That evening, back at the shop, Maya and I sat in silence for a long time. She finally spoke first. So that's it? They're finished? Not finished, I said. Exposed. There's a difference. The following week, news spread fast. Industry newsletters, procurement boards, even trade forums mentioned the case study from the expo. Some called it a lesson in ethics. Others simply called it karma. Either way, people knew, and that was enough. Then, just when I thought the storm had passed, a delivery truck pulled up outside Iron Bloom. The driver handed me a manila envelope. From Dawson & Co., he said. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming Iron Bloom had unlawfully replicated proprietary materials from Steel Line. I laughed out loud. They were suing me for stealing my own work. Maya read it over my shoulder. You want to make this public? She asked. Oh, yes, I said. Let's shine a little light. We sent copies of the letter and all our documentation to a few key contacts. Within 24 hours, the same procurement officers who'd been at the expo were sharing the story as a case study in what not to do. By the end of the week, the cease and desist had backfired spectacularly. When the next expo rolled around, they held a follow-up panel titled Integrity and the Cost of Imitation. The same two proposals were on the big screen again, but this time, there was no need for explanation. Everyone already knew the ending. Somewhere in the middle of the presentation, as the consultant dissected Steel Line's errors line by line, I saw a familiar figure seated quietly near the back, Ethan. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight, but his eyes looked lost. For a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the girl who once believed she was just labor, the one who worked herself raw for approval that would never come. When the panel ended, I walked out without looking back. I'd spent enough of my life staring at closed doors. That night, as I locked up the shop, I paused by the sign on our door. The letters of Iron Bloom Fabrication gleamed under the streetlight. Steady, unshaken, earned. I ran my hand over the metal, cool and solid beneath my palm, and felt something inside me settle. Let them copy the words, I thought. Let them mimic the shape, but they'll never recreate the soul. Because what we built here wasn't forged from imitation, it was forged from truth. And truth, once tempered, doesn't bend. A week after the expo, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not an email, not a typed note on company stationery, an actual handwritten letter. The kind that forces you to slow down as you open it, that carries the weight of ink and effort. The envelope was plain, the handwriting stiff and careful, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had written and rewritten the same words until they no longer knew which version hurt less. It was from my father. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper. You were right, it began. We built something, but you kept it alive. Ryan isn't ready. I don't expect forgiveness, but if there's ever a way forward, I'd like to earn it. There was no signature, just that final sentence, heavy with the kind of regret that can't be spoken aloud. I read it twice, then a third time. My chest tightened, but not with anger. It was something softer, sadder. Maybe closure, or maybe just the quiet realization that the people who once broke you were finally seeing the pieces for what they were, proof that you'd survived. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my desk drawer next to the first Iron Bloom business card I ever printed. The edges of that card were uneven, the font too bold, but it was perfect in its imperfection. It represented a beginning no one believed in but me. That weekend, we hosted Iron Bloom's first open house. The shop was spotless, the air humming with excitement. Maya had organized everything, banners, refreshments, even a few handmade signs that Jules and Marisol painted in bright red letters. Built by hands that care. The same phrase that used to hang above the Dawson & Co. loading dock. Except this time, the words meant something. Clients came with their families, curious neighbors wandered in, and a few city officials stopped by to see what all the buzz was about. The laughter, the smell of fresh-cut metal, the rhythm of boots on concrete, it all blended into something that felt like home. For once, I wasn't the invisible hand behind the work. I was the name on the wall, the woman shaking hands, the one people thanked by name. Midway through the day, a woman approached the display table with a piece of folded metal in her hands. "My husband built this 30 years ago," she said. "It's the last thing he made before he passed. The weld's cracked, but I couldn't throw it away." I took the piece from her, turned it gently under the light. "We can fix this," I said. When we handed it back an hour later, the weld glinted smooth and whole. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You gave it back to me," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "You kept it alive. We just reminded it what it was made of." Moments like that reminded me that Iron Bloom wasn't just a business. It was restoration, not just of metal, but of people, of dignity. Every job, every repair, every spark of the torch was a small act of defiance against the idea that labor is something to look down on. Late in the afternoon, the crowd began to thin. The sun dipped low, painting the shop in a wash of gold. I stepped outside for air, brushing my hands on my jeans. Across the street, a car idled quietly. Even before I saw his face, I knew it was Ethan. He sat there in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the shop. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just watched. I couldn't read his expression. Was it jealousy, regret, or something more complicated? He looked older, somehow smaller, like someone watching a life that could have been his if he'd made different choices. For a moment, I considered walking over. Part of me still wanted to bridge the gap, to fix things the way I used to fix everything else. But I didn't move, because fixing him wasn't my job anymore. Inside, I heard Maya calling for me. "Clara, come see this." When I turned back, the car was gone. I went inside, where the laughter was louder, the light warmer. Jules and Marisol were showing off their welds to a group of younger girls, faces bright with curiosity, hair tied back, hands eager to learn. Watching them, I felt something uncoil inside me, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. After the guests left, the shop was quiet again. I walked the floor slowly, tracing my fingers along the machines, the tables, the walls. Every mark, every dent, every burn carried a story. This place wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. Built from hard work, long nights, and the kind of faith you can't buy, only earn. I sat at my workbench, pulled out a napkin from my drawer, the same kind I'd written on the night I quit Dawson & Co. The words were still there, faded but legible. "I'm done." I smiled, realizing how wrong I'd been back then. I wasn't done. I was beginning the life I was meant to live. Maya joined me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," she said, "it still amazes me. We started with nothing but a barn and a broken welder." I nodded. "And a promise," I said, "that we'd build something that mattered." She grinned. "We did more than that. We built a community." We clinked our mugs together, a small, unspoken toast to everything we'd built, everything we'd lost, and everything still waiting to be forged. Later that night, I closed up the shop alone. The stars hung low over the Ohio sky, bright and steady. I turned off the lights one by one, the machines falling silent in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Before leaving, I paused by the sign above the main door, Iron Bloom Fabrication. I reached up, ran my hand over the letters, cool and sure beneath my palm. I thought about my father's letter again, about how he said he wanted to earn a way forward. Maybe one day he would. Maybe he wouldn't. But I realized that forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back in. Sometimes it's just about releasing their hold on your story. When I stepped outside, I felt the night air fill my lungs, clean, sharp, full of promise. I looked at my hands, the same hands that once built someone else's dream, the same hands that were called just labor. They were scarred, yes, but steady, capable, free. People used to say labor is the lowest rung of the ladder, but they were wrong. Labor builds ladders. Labor builds bridges, cities, futures. Labor builds empires. And as I walked toward my truck, the soft glow of the shop lights behind me, I knew one truth more certain than steel itself. Every empire worth standing on begins with someone who refused to stay small. I wasn't just labor. I was the foundation. And I was far from finished. When you look back at Clara Dawson's story, it's not just about welding or family business. It's about reclaiming identity. She grew up believing loyalty was the price of love, that working harder would eventually earn her a place at the table. But what she learned was something far greater. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from what no longer sees your worth. Clara turned pain into purpose, transforming rejection into fuel. From a grease-stained factory floor to the proud owner of Iron Bloom Fabrication, she didn't just build metal, she built herself back up. Her story teaches us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through quiet resilience. We all face moments when others underestimate us, when we're labeled by what we do instead of who we are. The truth is, no one gets to define your value but you. Clara's journey reminds us that walking away isn't failure, it's direction. It's choosing peace over permission, self-respect over validation. And when you finally build something that's yours, whether it's a business, a dream, or simply a better version of yourself, you realize that the foundation of every great success isn't privilege or luck. It's labor. Labor with heart. Labor with integrity. Labor that refuses to break even when everything else does. So ask yourself, are you still building someone else's dream, or are you ready to start welding your own? Now here's your question. If you were in Clara's place, what would you have done? A. Stayed and tried to prove yourself within the family business. B. Walked away to start over, even if it meant risking everything. Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why you chose it. What do you think about Clara's decision? Do you believe family loyalty should outweigh self-respect, or is freedom the truest form of success? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can learn from each other. And if stories like Clara's inspire you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might just change the way you see your own.